All right, folks, my name is Bob Stewart. I'm the director of the School of Journalism, and for those of you who are normally in a Friday class in here, you're probably very confused what's going on. I'm going to say a couple words and turn this over to your professor to set this up, and then we're going to turn it over to Kyle Bowser, who is here to lead us through a discussion. This is part of Black Alumni Reunion. This is a program in conjunction with the Alvin Adams Symposium. Earlier today, we heard from his family and from some of his colleagues and friends about Al the man. And if you weren't at that, that will be shown, that will be available online so you can watch that. But this is really an exercise in how to tell a story about a remarkable person. And we appreciate Professor Babrow for letting you be part of this. So I'm going to let Professor Babrow say a few words, and then he will introduce or turn it over to Kyle.
Yeah, I'm gonna just be very brief. So we've been talking in this class, in the comm theory class, about the importance of rhetoric in society, and we've been considering what happens in a society when rhetoricians speak only to influence the public, when they have no regard for the truth. And I'm hoping that your eyes are opening to the importance of this matter. There are very few things in this society more important right now than the importance of truth. And journalism, of course, is one of the bastions of truth, one of the fountains of truth in this society. And we're going to hear today about a pioneer in journalism, a wonderful journalist in civil rights. And I think you're going to find this quite interesting and quite relevant to class. So I don't think I want to take any more time, but. So I'll turn it over to our.
Okay, I think this is on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay, great. First of all, thank you for being here. I want everyone to recognize this young lady here, Allison Hunter, who made this possible for me to even be here, so please thank her. This is a very special weekend. Every 3 years, Black alumni return to campus to celebrate our Bobcatism. And it's great to do it during the school year so we get a chance to interact with students as well. If I start to sound like I'm just speaking gibberish, please forgive me. I presented a program last night at Baker Center, this morning here, and then I have another one tomorrow at the Athena Cinema, so a lot of topics are swirling around in my head all at one time, so I apologize in advance. I live in Los Angeles, and 5 years ago, working in tandem with the dean's office, and any of you know who Roger Cooper is, Media Arts and Studies? Yeah. Together, yes, thank you for applauding Roger, he's a great guy. Together we launched the Ohio in LA program. I don't know if you've heard of this, but every semester 20 to 25 students come to Los Angeles. It's an immersion program. You live in the area, all the students get internships throughout the entertainment industry, whether that's with TV networks or film studios or production companies or management companies or agencies or whatever the audio engineering studios, and spend an entire semester there. We've been doing it for 5 years now, and I teach one of the courses that the class takes. And so a lot of what I'm going to share with you today is grafted from some of my course material. I'm going to try to run through 17 weeks of curriculum in less than an hour, which is kind of crazy. And I'm also going to try to tie that curriculum into the amazing story of Alvin Adams. We just adjourned a session in here where Mr. Adams' family had the opportunity to share their stories about their remembrances of him, and more importantly than their remembrances of him, really to share the content of the man, the content of the character of the man, so we could have a real appreciation for what he stood for in life. I hope to touch upon some of those themes today. Obviously, I'm not as familiar with his life as they are, and some of them are in the room, so I apologize where I may go astray. Blame it on my mind, not my heart. So let's get this started. I'm going to share with you the story of a very important lady in my life. Her name is Aunt Edna. She's no longer with us, but I'm going to try quickly tell you an interesting story that I think is pertinent to the overall discussion. Aunt Edna attended Central State University in the late 50s, as did my mother and my father. I'm originally from Philadelphia, where my parents are from, but they were out-of-state students at Central State. And when I was about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 years old, somewhere in that time of my life in Philadelphia, my mother said, hey, we're going to go on a vacation to Los Angeles. I had never been on a plane before, so this is a very exciting idea. And so we came to Los Angeles. We stayed with Aunt Edna, who lived in Los Angeles, for about, I don't know, a week or 10 days, something like that. And we did all the touristy things that you would think people you would do. You saw the Pacific Ocean and the beach, and we went to the Universal Studios tour, and went to Disneyland, of course, all the fun things. But I had a secret that I did not share with my mother or Aunt Edna, only because I came from a town where the thing that I aspired to do most was so outside the box. I didn't want to be ridiculed for having that kind of a dream, and many of you may come from communities like that. I don't know, times have changed now. You can be anywhere now and dream and see yourself in any vocation. But at that time in my life, it seemed very far-fetched to do what I wanted to do. And what I really wanted to do was be a recording artist. And my secret was, while in Los Angeles, as we were traveling around to all these points of interest, I had hoped that we would bump into this gentleman named Berry Gordy. Now, many of you don't know who Berry Gordy is, but Berry Gordy was the founder of a record label called Motown, which was born in Detroit, Michigan. And in the 60s and into the 70s, and then a little bit even into the 80s, Motown was probably the most successful record label, particularly with an emphasis on rhythm and blues music, and music that expressed the African American experience. I could give you a long list of artists who were signed to the Motown label. And I wanted to see this man, and my vision in my head was, if I saw him anywhere on the streets of Los Angeles, I would immediately start to dance and sing and try to impress him. And I imagined he would pull a record contract out of his pocket and sign it on the spot. Well, we spent our week to 10 days in Los Angeles, never saw Berry Gordy. My mother and I got back on a plane, went back to Philadelphia, began to live out the rest of my life. 25 years later, after graduating from law school, I was hired by Fox Broadcasting Company to then relocate to Los Angeles. And my mother handed me a slip of paper that had Aunt Edna's phone number on it and instructed me to call her once I arrived. And I said, Mom, I have not seen this lady. I have not talked to her in 25 years. By the way, Aunt Edna's not a blood relative. I just call her Aunt Edna. She was just my mom's friend. So I said, she won't remember me. And my mother said, of course she will, call her. So I get to Los Angeles, I get settled in, I start working for a couple of weeks, I find this piece of paper, I say, you know what, let me call my Aunt Edna. I call her up, the receptionist transfers me to her office, she answers the phone, I said, hey, you may not remember me, this is Kyle. Oh my God, I can't believe you're calling me. I said, yes, it's been a long time. Where are you? I said, I'm in Los Angeles. What are you doing here? I live here now, I'm working for Fox. Oh my God, we must go to dinner tonight. I said, okay. So I take Aunt Edna out to dinner, and I'm thanking her for the hospitality she shared with us so many years before. And I said to her, you know, at that time I had a secret that I wanted to meet Berry Gordy, but I was so embarrassed to admit that to you and Mom. And Aunt Edna said, well, I wish you had told me, because for the last 30 years I have been his executive assistant. I took a vacation to host you and your mother when you came to visit. She did eventually introduce me to Berry Gordy. I no longer had the aspiration of being a recording artist. But the epilogue to this story is, all of these events preceded the introduction of a guy named Michael Jackson. So had I met Berry Gordy and had I danced and sang for him, I probably would have become Michael Jackson. Minus the chimp. And so the next slide kind of, if it's going to work. It's not going to work. Let's try that again. The next slide, well, let's forget that. Let's move on to this slide. Okay, so Dr. Amy Adams admonished us about an hour ago that we should all strive to secure for ourselves some professional title that will help to market ourselves to the industries that we hope to enjoy. I agree with that, but at the same time, I have reverence for storytelling. And I happen to believe that, as she pointed out in her delivery, storytelling spans all kinds of fields. You don't have to be a writer or a novelist or a journalist. You can be a plumber and still be a storyteller. I just told you a story, and hopefully by telling you that story, I've in some small way given you a glimpse of who I am, where I'm coming from, what my vibe is. But today we're going to talk about not only storytelling, but also story selling. I'm hoping this clicker is going to continue to work. There we go. All right, so when I was a freshman here majoring in communication, I think first day of Communication 101, we had to study this. I don't know if they still teach it. It's so basic. I'm going to try to rip through it very quickly. But in the communication model, you've got to have a sender, you've got to have a receiver, right? And you got to have a channel through which the communication flows. Everybody's familiar with this model? Yes? No? Yes. All right, good. And obviously there's a message that flows through the channel, okay? I think, Amy, you talked about this as well. The sender has an intention or an intent in that message, and the receiver has an interpretation. They may not be the same. Spend some time in my house, listen to me and my wife communicate, you will see they're not usually the same. I say X, she hears Y. And that's usually caused by noise in the channel. And noise can come from a lot of different sources. The time of the communication, the space in which the communication is delivered, or the mode in which it is transmitted. All of us have had the experience of texting with someone, and their interpretation of what we've communicated is not at all what we meant, right? There's also, if you look at the head of the receiver, there's also noise inside the receiver's mind. They've got other things going on in their life. They may have a preconception of what the sender's intent is, and that can help to cloud their interpretation of the message. The only way that the sender knows what the receiver interpreted is through feedback. It's very important that we get feedback. So as I'm talking to you now and you're looking at me with blank faces, I have no idea what anything I'm saying is even registering. But that's okay. Time requires that I keep pressing on. So I analogize the communication model to the business model. In the business model, you have a seller, you have a channel of distribution, and you have a buyer. All right? In my mind, that's very analogous to a sender, a channel, and a receiver. And the seller has to contend with things that sort of make noise within the distribution channel. Intellectual property, Amy, you talked about this a little bit. Intellectual property, anybody know what that is? Come on now, we don't have time for this. Yes, sir.
Trade secrets or methodologies that are kind of corporate owned or workflows, strategies that make you more competitive than your competitors.
Right, right. So the clothes that you have on your back now are your property. The ideas that you have in your head can be your property if and only if they are fixed in a tangible medium. Okay? Copyright law demands that. So if you have an idea for a movie and you say, you know what, I got this great idea for a movie. It's about monkeys that fly. Great. If you don't write that script, or if you don't find a way to get that movie recorded in some tangible format, it's just an idea. So if you turn on TV one day or you go to a movie theater and you see your idea up on the screen and you go, wait a minute, they ripped me off? No, they didn't rip you off. You didn't take the next step of securing your idea. So it's not really intellectual property until it's secured. I'm going to breeze through this stuff because you got 17 weeks of stuff you got to learn here real quick. Labor is a part of the business model. Marketing, obviously, and then of course sales. Marketing, you know, we've all heard the adage: if a tree falls in the woods, no one hears it. It doesn't make a sound. Well, if you're distributing a product or a service and no one knows about it, you're wasting your time. There's another model that I find to be analogous to this, and I call it the content model. In the content model, you have a storyteller or a journalist or whatever. But you have a storyteller, right, who is trying to communicate with an audience. And there's a whole process that goes on that can last 3 days or can last 30 years called development. That's why I spend my life mostly in development. And most people refer to it as development hell. But you have to develop a story, which means you have to have sources for the information, for the idea. You have to have your intellectual property rights. There should be some resonance. This story should, in some way, you know, touch people, touch a chord in them, and there may be a cause associated with that story. There should be some talent attached. When I say talent, don't necessarily think in front of the screen, right, or in front of the camera, but there are all kinds of people who are both above the line and below the line. Anybody know what that term means, above the line, below the line? Okay, so on, let's say, a film, you may have writers, producers, directors, actors, and there's a longer list of folks who could fit under that above the line character category. But below the line people tend to be skilled services where their wages are fixed in a budget. Above the line people are people who are able to negotiate their fees, okay? So if I have a great idea for a movie, it's called Monkeys That Fly, and I want to get, who's your favorite actor? Actress, actor, doesn't matter. I hate to put you on the spot, but it really doesn't matter. Who's yours? Channing Tatum. I want Channing Tatum in the movie, right? I say, okay, Channing, listen, I got $100, but I need you to do this movie. He's going to tell me to go away, right? And he's going to give me his agent's phone number, and I'm going to spend time on the phone negotiating with the agent to try to get him at a price that I can afford. He's an above-the-line player, and sometimes above-the-line players go, you know what, your movie doesn't even get made unless I'm in it. That's how critical I am to it. These people who are below the line don't have that flexibility. Cameraman, we got $2.15. You either want the job if you don't. If you don't want the job, that's fine, because there's a million people in line behind you who will take it. Moving on, once again, marketing is important, and distribution is important. There's a variety of platforms of distribution. You can have exhibition, you can have broadcast, cable, satellite. Everybody know what over the top is? That's Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, blah, blah, blah. And obviously your generation is most familiar with online and mobile. These are platforms that are now used to distribute content. All right, so here are the players at the table when you're developing content. You've got your source, the person who has the idea. You may have talent attached, the agent who's representing talent, producers who often carry the burden of financing this production, director, someone who can give it some creative vision and shape. There's a studio, which is often the distributor of the project and can be the financier, as is distributor. That's kind of redundant. Marketing folks are involved. If you're talking about TV, you're going to have some sponsorship, right? You're going to need advertisers to help fund this exercise. And then, of course, the audience. That's where you get your feedback from. And feedback can come in the form of ratings from television broadcasts, or you can come in form of box office receipts, or likes in social media. All of these people are supposed to be collaborating together. Huh? Good luck with that. Because they all want to put their fingerprints on it. As a storyteller, it is often advantageous to leave your story sufficiently or slightly vague enough to allow for others to put their fingerprints on it, because others hold the purse strings, okay? Sometimes, and we're going to get into this in a minute, but sometimes you go into a room and you pitch not the story you hope to ultimately put on the screen, but the story you feel confident you can sell. And then throughout that long development process, you might be able to move the project closer to what you ultimately hope to see on the screen. Remember, the first slide I showed you, this is about story selling, not just storytelling. Because money, of course, is the most important factor, everyone at that table. Okay, so now we're going to get into story structure. I'm speeding through this, guys. I apologize. Because you're leaving at 12:45, right? Oh, boy. Okay, so every story has a plot, which is sort of the string of events. There's a central conflict there, a through line. Ultimately, that plot will drive to some resolution. You see there where it says conflict equals drama. Even if you're dealing with a comedic story, you must have conflict. There will be some measure of drama. Comedy really comes as a reaction to conflict. So just keep that in mind. There's a subplot. Oftentimes the story will veer off to some tangent that is related to the story, but it gives you greater insight into the characters and what motivates them. And there's a backstory. So when the movie opens up, we meet John and Jane and we hear their story, what they're going through, but in the course of telling their story, at some point, information starts to come out about events that happened prior to the opening credits of our production. Backstory is important. It helps to fill in the blanks about who these characters are, what them. So in the story structure, there's usually the traditional 3-act structure. The act 1 is the setup. You're meeting the characters for the first time. The protagonist, I guess everyone knows, the protagonist is sort of your lead character, right? The one that you follow. And very often, writers see themselves in the protagonist, and if they've done a really good job at writing, the audience will also find themselves in that same character. It's important to tap into the universality of storytelling so that audiences far and wide can appreciate it. So we tap into what the protagonist's reality is, and there's some inciting incident. We meet this person, they come outside of the house, they pick up the newspaper, the sprinklers on the lawn are going, it's early morning, they come back in the house, all of a sudden, boom, the house blows up. Now we're into a story, right? It was just okay, and then suddenly there was an explosion, and now we're more intrigued about. So there's always an inciting incident that sort of kicks off the drama of our story. Oh, I forgot to mention that the protagonist has powers. Now, in the superhero realm, you're talking about, okay, I can shoot webs out of my arms, or I can stretch my arm, or whatever that power, I can fly, whatever that power might be. But you could be talking about a character who just happens to be a really, really good dad, or a character who just happens to be a jerk. And they're such a jerk that they really antagonize other people. These are the superpowers or the powers of the characters. In Act 2, we build on this inciting incident. The protagonist begins to learn more about their journey and what's ahead of them. And they have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to take the risk of the journey that's been presented to them. Complications and reversals are established. There's a midpoint where this is the moment where they have to sort of renew their commitment. Yes, even though it's daunting, I'm going to go on this journey, I'm going to take on this task, I'm going to save the world, whatever the story is about. And then in Act, I did the wrong thing, guys. There we go, okay. Then in Act 3, we have our conclusion. This is where the protagonist meets up with the antagonist, and they finally duke it out. Again, in a superhero movie, that literally is a fight. Everybody familiar with the Rocky series of movies? Just give you a little insight into how old I am. I was a freshman here, and I went to the Athena Cinema on Court Street and saw the original Rocky movie. But Rocky's, that whole series of movies is great in establishing a protagonist and antagonist conflict that resolves in the 3rd act with the main event. Rocky has to go in and fight whoever it is that's been antagonizing him all movie long. Moving on. The architecture of story, I know it's a corny sound effect. The architecture of story structure. I want you to underline the word architecture because we're going to come back to that. So we have a graph here that shows we have this inciting moment that kind of kicks things off. And then there's exposition about that. And then we have this sort of rising action where the drama builds, the conflict builds. Again, even if it's a comedy, there's conflict the tension is being ratcheted up throughout this whole thing. And we reach a climactic moment, all right? And then we come to a resolution. So development is about storytelling, it's about getting the talent attached, it's about the production folk above the line and below the line, it's about marketing, making sure people know about it, it's about finding the right platform of distribution for it. And then ultimately that slice at the top is about the pitch, okay? So in our pitch model, we go back to our a little diagram here of a sender and a receiver and our intent and our interpretation. Now in the pitch, you got this great idea. You know everybody's going to love it if you can just get the gatekeeper to let you tell your story. But you've got to satisfy them, okay? They have a business imperative that must be met, and your story has to fall in line with that. And so the value to you has to be a value to them as well. What you think is good may not be good to them. It may be bad because it's so original that it's never been tested before. You're telling them that it's novel, they're hearing that it's risky. You're telling me it's groundbreaking, they're hearing it's unfamiliar. You're saying it's unprecedented, they're also saying, yeah, and it's unproven. I don't know that I can get an audience to this thing because I don't see anything else out there in the marketplace like this. If Hollywood is not good at anything, it is good at replicating success. That's why you have Rocky 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because that format has been proven over and over again to work. And you'll see that same replication happen across many, many titles. And so the industry does this all the time. And you have to have that in mind as you go in and pitch your idea. It's good. It's a win-win situation when you can say it's innovative. It's not necessarily groundbreaking, it's innovative. Innovative means it takes what's already been done and it, adds a little variation to it, adds a little doohickey to the side that makes it, oh, okay, that's a new take on something we've seen before. We feel comfortable about moving ahead with that. You can have auspices attached to what makes them feel comfortable. Oh, I have Channing Tatum attached to my program. Oh, okay, now I'll invest in that. And other ways that you can demonstrate to them that it will be a win-win situation. Editing, I'm not going to really go too far into this, except, but obviously you know that editing happens both in the written and audible and in the visual realms, right? Where my son graduated from this school in May, by the way. But when he was in the third grade, second grade, something like that, I put a note on his bulletin board in his bedroom. And the note said, writing is rewriting. So all of you who aspire to be storytellers, please keep this axiom in mind. Your writing is never done. What usually happens is you run out of time. But you can always perfect the writing. You can always perfect the storytelling. And be open to feedback from others. Hopefully that feedback is constructive and objective. But writing is rewriting. Okay, identity. I think it is critically important for storytellers to have a sense of self and a sense of who it is that you're trying to communicate with. The model I showed you with the sender and the receiver and the channel and the feedback, all of that just affirms this point that you have to have a sense of identity. Who are you is the critical question. And I'm not going to do it today, but in my class out in LA, we go through this whole exercise. We go around the room and we do this thing where people try to get in touch and express who it is that they are. And it's really interesting to see how shallow people describe themselves, when in fact, we are a bunch of deeper beings. Oh, I went too far. Let me back up. Okay, so, stuck. Here we go. This little diagram here gives you just a sense of all the different facets that may make up who you are and how you might describe yourself. And you can say all those things on that wheel apply to you, or you can pick and choose the ones, and there may be others that aren't represented there. But oftentimes you'll say, well, who are you? Oh, well, my name is Joe, and I'm from Columbus, and I play basketball, period. There's a lot more that goes into Joe than just that. This concept of intersectionality, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, Dr. Kim Crenshaw of Los Angeles sort of introduced into the zeitgeist, and it's the idea that we are each individually comprised of so many different aspects and facets of personality that we can't be narrowed to just one. I think it's a brilliant concept, and I'm glad it has been evolving. I do think that there is a backlash to that, in that sometimes certain identities get lost because the emphasis gets spread too far and too wide. Don't have time to get into that. We'll talk about that another time. All right, media advocacy, which happens to be my favorite subject within this particular curriculum, because I recognize the value of using media as a tool to advocate for social change. The strategic use of mass media to advance public policy initiatives. That to me is sexy, okay? And if Alvin Adams was nothing else, he was a media advocate. He was able to take his professional, I keep coming to you on that one, his professional technical skills and apply them to a canvas that was painting pictures. Actually, that canvas was more, it wasn't a canvas, it was a mirror. It was holding a mirror up to society and saying, look at yourself. Do you like what you see? And in many ways, because of his efforts, society's answer was, no, not really. We got to change this. Do I have audio? Hello? I don't even have video. Let's go back.
We heard the sound effect.
Let's try it. Yeah, we did hear the sound effect, didn't we? Let's try that again. We're here, and now we're here.
In 1963, under orders by City Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor, Birmingham, Alabama City Police used fire hoses and police dogs against children and adults engaged in nonviolent protests against segregation. The demonstrations were part of Martin Luther King Jr.'s Birmingham campaign. Television news coverage of the attacks by police sparked mass nationwide protests.
So we've all heard of the civil rights movement, and most of us are confused in thinking that that was some specific start date and end date, and that somehow miraculously after 400 years of oppression, our country said, okay, we fixed it. But in actuality, that didn't happen. But what did happen during that finite period of time is that some very smart people figured out that this fight that they were waging would have more resonance, and their efforts would be more successful if they could share the imagery and the storytelling of those events with a wider audience. If you're marching and you're being sprayed and beat and having dogs set upon you, and the only people who know about it are the people who are right there where it's happening, well, those are the same people who are practicing the oppression. So not much is going to change. But if we bring in the Alvin Adams of the world, if we bring in the cameras and we shine a light on that, what's going to happen is it's going to get beamed into the homes of Americans all around. And they're going to put pressure on people who reside at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And they're going to say, we're looking in the mirror and we don't like what we see. And we need you to do something about this. So that's what happened during the Civil Rights Movement. Public attention was turned toward this fight. Now I want to tell you quickly tell you a story of one of my ancestors. Her name is Mary Elizabeth Bowser, and she was born in Virginia, in the Richmond area, and she was born a slave. The gentleman who owned her passed away, and his widow and his daughter inherited his properties and his slaves. Well, it turns out that his widow was quite indifferent on the subject of slavery, as was Abraham Lincoln, but that's another whole story. But his daughter, in fact, was an abolitionist. She didn't believe in the institution of slavery. And so she created this faux freedom reality for the slaves that they owned. While on their property, she tried to treat them as if they were free. they couldn't go anywhere else. But while they were there, she didn't oppress them. But she took a particular interest in Mary as a young woman, and she sent Mary to Philadelphia to be educated by Quakers. And Mary became a very articulate and intelligent and wise woman. At some point, these events all preceded the Civil War. The young lady in Virginia, her name was Elizabeth Lou, who sent Mary to Philadelphia, she began to spy on behalf of the Union Army once the war started. And she petitioned Mary, who was living in Philadelphia, my ancestor, to return to Richmond because Elizabeth Lou was a friend of Verena Davis, the wife of Jefferson Davis. And if you don't know, Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy. And Verena Davis had shared with Elizabeth Lou that she was looking for a new girl to work in the home. And so Elizabeth Lou petitioned Mary to come to Richmond and to work in the home of Verena and Jefferson Davis as a spy. And so Mary came back. She made the incredible choice to go back into slavery, the unbelievable choice to do that, and to work as a spy, which means she had to mask the fact that she was now an educated and intelligent and articulate and wise woman. Instead, take on this other demeanor that would not be detected. So I'm developing this project now as a film, and I have, I have messed up is what I've done. Oh, okay, there we go. And I have attached auspices to it. We can turn this volume down just a little bit. I don't know how to do that, unless I do it on my laptop. So there's an actress named Gabrielle Union, who I've attached now to portray Mary Elizabeth Bowser, and together she's also going to co-produce it with me, and so we're now developing this story, The Secret Slave, the unthinkable choice of Mary Elizabeth Bowser. I tell you this story only because I want you to start to think about the legacy of courage. We can turn down a little bit more too, please, thank you. One of the things that really disillusioned Mary was, after receiving this Quaker education, the Quakers convinced her to board a ship with many other blacks and to migrate to Liberia. Liberia is a country in Africa that was established for the purpose of receiving ex-slaves from the United States. And Mary agreed to do that. And after spending 5 years there, she didn't enjoy it and returned to Philadelphia. And that's when Elizabeth Lou made her petition for Mary to come to Richmond. Well, this is a recurring experience. Everybody know what this piece of architecture is? You've seen this? If you haven't, just walk around campus. This is the log cabin that's on this campus that was the original home of the president of the university. I believe it's moved around campus a few times. I think where it's sitting right now is like its third location. I don't know why they keep moving it. And I don't know what's currently, there's some office that's operating out of there now. Does anybody know what it is? Welcome Center. Okay. But this is also the home where John Newton Templeton lived. Do anybody know what that name is? Memorial Auditorium is named after John Newton Templeton. John Newton Templeton was the first African-American graduate of Ohio University, the fourth African-American graduate of any major university in the United States. And while a student here, for reasons that I can't imagine, he wasn't allowed to live in the residence halls. And so he lived in this log cabin with the president of the university and his wife. And Professor Charles Smith, is he still here? Is he still? Wrote a great play. Oh man, I keep pushing the wrong buttons. Wrote a great play called Free Man of Color. which is the story of John Newton Templeton and his time here at Ohio University. Imagine a guy who showed up here, the only African American in the entire university, not allowed to stay in the residence hall because obviously that would not have worked out well. And by the time he graduated, he gave the commencement address. Imagine how dynamic he was. Imagine how courageous he had to be. But what happens in this play, A Free Man of Color, which I had the opportunity to see in Los Angeles, and had heard of John Newton Templeton, because obviously I was a graduate of the school, but did not know this facet of the story. Like Mary Elizabeth Bowser, the president of the university convinced John, or tried to convince John, to become a leader who might lead blacks to Liberia. And for a while, John espoused that philosophy, that would be the best thing. Let's relieve this tension by just exiting everyone somewhere else. Eventually, before his passing, John denounced that philosophy and understood that he was as American and as anyone else and deserved to be here as anyone else. This is a recurring theme. This is a video that I'm probably not going to show you much of, but it's something that I did a few years ago for the university where I sort of tried to bring John Newton Templeton to life. And he gives an address where he basically is petitioning us, our generation of Bobcats, to move forward with the university by giving money and giving our time and our treasure and assisting. No, that's okay, because I'm not going to go show this, really. Anyway, this video, you can go on YouTube and find this video. It goes on and on and on. But the point is, we brought John Newton Templeton back to life to try to make him relevant again. Has anybody seen this piece of architecture? Remember I told you architecture was going to recur. Has anybody seen this piece of architecture? You're familiar with it, right? Okay, good. So enter that daily thou mayest grow in knowledge, wisdom, and love. I went here 4 years, never even thought to look up and read that thing. We've all seen it. It was presented to the university by the class of 1915. What no one knows is, though, it was paid for by a guy named Edwin C. Berry. Mr. Berry was a successful businessman in the area, and although he did not attend Ohio University, had an affinity for the school and made the contribution to the university so that over these generations, the 20s, the 40s, and present day, this gateway still stands and is a very iconic image on this campus. Mr. Berry was a Black-Alachian. I live in Los Angeles. I've lived there for nearly 30 years, and I would guess 85% of the people that I know, and I know a lot of people, 85% of the people I know in Los Angeles are not from Los Angeles. It's kind of rare to actually meet a native Los Angelino, or whatever they call themselves. Because everybody comes there from somewhere else pursuing some kind of dream or whatever. And so most people you meet are from somewhere else. Guess what? That same dynamic is true on this campus. We are not from, most of us are not from Southeastern Ohio. How many of you are from Southeastern Ohio? See what I mean? So one of the things that we as visitors don't know is that there is a very rich, deep, and important Black-Alachian culture. Black folks are from this area, and they have contributed to the making of all that is here. Edward Berry was a Black-Alachian, and he was so successful he was able to build a hotel on Court Street. It was replaced years later by the diner, which, is that still there now? But I think that's going to be gone soon, right? Right. But the plaque in front of the diner tells the story of Edwin Berry. Now, let me tell you something about Edwin Berry and this hotel he had. He was the first hotelier to put a Bible in every room. He and his wife were credited as being the first hoteliers to put personal toiletries in every room. My wife would love him because she steals every small bottle of lotion and all that crap. The story goes that at night he would go around from room to room and collect clothing, bring it to his wife, and she would stay up all night sewing buttons back on shirts and mending things. So they were first-class hoteliers for the day, and as you might imagine in this region, 90+% of their guests were white. But on the rare occasion when they did get a black guest, Edwin Berry went out of his way to make sure that they were just as comfortable as any other guest. He was courageous. Anybody know what that building is? Another piece of architecture. Anybody know? Raise your hand if you know. What is it? What hall? Adams Hall. You know who it's named after? Don't even know, right? You're sitting in the room about the Alvin Adams Symposium. That building is named after Alvin Adams. It was dedicated to the university in 2007. What's ironic, well, I'll tell you in a minute what's ironic about that. That's Mr. Adams there, and there he is again, as a much younger man. That's Chubb Hall. This is Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, which he was a member. And there's a book out about the 50s, from 1950 to 1960, the Soulful Bobcat Experience. What's ironic about the fact that there's an Alvin Adams residence hall in his campus is that Alvin Adams didn't live on campus. He too was a black Appalachian, and so he was able to travel here daily, but there remains a question, I'm sure his family would know far better than me, whether if he wanted to be a resident here, if he would have been, if he would have felt welcome. Maybe he would have allowed to have been, but maybe he would not have felt as welcome. So he traveled here as a commuter student daily. I have a friend, another actor, his name is Blair Underwood, and his father was a classmate of Mr. Adams. Colonel Underwood, Frank Underwood is his name. He was the first, how many of you guys are football fans? How many of you guys pay attention to Ohio University football, Bobcat football? You do? Give me a guess, how many of those players you think are African American? 80%. Well, Colonel Frank Underwood was the first African American football player for the university when they attended in the late 50s. A lot has changed, right? September 23rd, 1957, Mr. L. Alex Wilson, who was the editor and managing director for the Tri-State Defender, which was a Memphis newspaper, went to Little Rock, Arkansas to cover the story of the desegregation of Central High School. He was met with what you see on the screen. He was a journalist, just there to cover the story. So when you told the story earlier today of the gentleman who was bitten by the dog, William Gadsden, I have an event tomorrow at the Athena Cinema, and I have a flyer that promotes that event, and his photograph is on that, and I didn't know his name till you shared it with me, so thank you. I appreciate that. But this gentleman's name is L. Alex Wilson. So this is 1957. Your dad graduated in 59, right? So while this guy's getting beat up on the street simply for being a storyteller, 2 years later, Alvin Adams is graduating from Ohio University with the aspiration of taking his place. But he couldn't get a job in Ohio. Is there anything you see common amongst these photographs? Could not find a job. I wonder why. But he did find a job eventually. He worked for the Chicago Defender, which was an all-black daily newspaper in Chicago. And although it was published in Chicago, the Chicago Defender was a paper that spread far and wide. It traveled the nation. People all over the country African Americans in particular, read the Chicago Defender. It was our way, like you guys now just pull out your phone and just say, okay, what's happening? But back then, we had to wait for the newspaper to arrive to find out what was happening around the country. And Mr. Adams was fortunate enough to be hired into their ranks. While at the Chicago Defender, he covered the greatest march ever convened in this nation. That's my personal opinion. There have been other marches that are, really good, but that one was pretty incredible. 1963, the March on Washington. He also worked for Jet magazine, where he covered a number of events and personalities, to include the two gentlemen you see here. Anybody know who those people are? No? No clue? Okay, that's Bert and that's Ernie. Seriously, you don't know who that is? Okay, it's time for me to go. Who's got their hand raised? Who is it? Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. It's great that you said their names. The unfortunate thing is, even with the names, you still don't know who those people are. The guy with the hat on is Malcolm X. If you're familiar with the term yin and yang, and how they're opposites, but they kind of are interdependent on each other, Martin Luther King Jr., who I know you've heard about because our ideal demands that you know who he is. But Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X are the yin and yang of the civil rights movement. Martin said, you know what, we got to come together, we got to love each other, we got to find common ground. Malcolm said, either treat me right or get out my way. They were the yin and the yang. Muhammad Ali is the greatest boxer that ever lived. Again, my personal opinion. But beyond his talent in the boxing ring, he's one of the greatest humanitarians that ever lived. He refused to fight in the Vietnam War. The United States government stripped him of his boxing crown and his license to box and threatened him with imprisonment, and he still refused to go to war. And the Supreme Court ultimately unanimously agreed with Muhammad Ali, and so he was restored with his boxing license and was able to once again be the heavyweight champion of the world. But anyway, Mr. Adams covered those gentlemen and many, 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 many more people while working for the Chicago Defender and then moving on to Jet magazine. You don't know who Jet magazine is? That's okay. It was one of two major publications from the Johnson Publishing Company out of Chicago, Illinois. The other was called Ebony magazine. And Jet was a weekly. Came out every week. I got it. My mom got it in our home every week. Every week I would go immediately to the beauty of the week, which was a beautiful black woman in a bathing suit. I couldn't wait to see those photos. But it was our internet. It's where we got our information about what was happening around the world. Okay, now I'm going to need a little bit more volume. I'm sorry. This is Chet Huntley. I know you don't know who he is, but he was a major newscaster back in the 60s. And this is a report on Governor George Wallace of Alabama's stance in front of the University of Alabama, refusing to allow African Americans to enroll in the school. And the president sent down his emissary to say, hey, you know what? They got to go to school here. I'm not going to show you this whole video, but I do want you to see, well, this is Governor, you can turn it up a little bit. This is Governor Wallace explaining why he's not going to move aside and let these two black students come into the school, because they're going to just mess up everything. But what I really want you to see, you can leave the volume up. You can just leave it there. What I really want you to see is, I'll get to it in a second. Wallace eventually relented. You see how many people are out there?
This then is the moment.
You see the crowds? There literally are hundreds of people out there. Hundreds. Okay, we can turn it back down now. These are the two students that were being denied admission, who eventually, later on that afternoon, were in fact admitted to the school and attended the school. But all those hundreds of people out there, there were 4 black journalists out of all those people. And you saw the picture of the lone gentleman who was beaten by the crowd just a few years earlier in Arkansas. Well, now Alvin Adams is standing amongst those throngs of people reporting on this story. Courageous. And he posted his report. And he says, like Simon Peter standing at the door without, well, you can read it for yourself. So you see the pictures of what he had to contend with, but he stood there and he got the story. So social advocacy. Now we're coming, present day, and we've got new platforms, new mechanisms, new ways of communicating story, new ways for you to be storytellers. Obviously, social media is your medium of choice. The question is, what are you going to do with it? I don't need to see another picture of whatever it is you're about to sit down and eat. I really could care less. I really could care less. I can't think of a greater waste of time or resource or intellect than for you to use social media for frivolous purposes. There's too much happening out here that needs some serious attention. And too many of you have the ability to capture those stories and disseminate those stories to an unknowing world that needs to be enlightened and needs to be changed. I'm trying to do that. I've got a lot of things going on, but one of the things that I have going on is this project called Trial by Jury, and I have different installments to the series. Last night I presented Trial by Jury, a case of deportation over in Baker Center, and tomorrow I'm presenting Trial by Jury, the case of the N-word at the Athena. And what I do in that project is I show you a film, which is a trial followed by a jury deliberation. And then we stop the film and we convene a town hall discussion with the live audience. And we talk about all the issues that were raised at the trial. And ultimately, you, the audience, gets to vote to determine a verdict in the case. And so if you feel inclined, please come join us on Saturday at 2 p.m. at the Athena and participate in this process. But even if you don't come to that, participate in the process of being alive, of being whatever series of intersectional traits you want to claim, of being an American, of being a bobcat. Just participate. I think that's it. I wanted to leave some time for questions and answers. I know I raced through a whole bunch of stuff. Hopefully you're able to connect the dots that I probably didn't do a good job of connecting. But my purpose was to first try to give you some technical understanding of what basic storytelling is, and then try to apply that schematic to the courageous legacy of Alvin Adams and others who use storytelling to make a change in the world. So I know you guys have to run, but if there's any questions before you go, please ask them now. I did it.
I don't think there's another class after this in here, so if you've got to go, we have like 70 minutes to get the other classes go, but if you can stay, I think we've got some space here, got some time.
Okay, that's fair. Hey.